Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall event. Now I'd like to introduce your host for today, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems.
Hi, good afternoon. Ed Bassett, I'm a security officer with NeoSystems. Today we have a special guest lined up, Regan Edens, a member of the CMMC Accreditation body. Unfortunately, Regan has been called away for some urgent business and may or may not be able to join us today. So we're still waiting to see whether we'll be able to have him on here. I will be talking a little bit about some areas of interest within CMMC initiative, some questions that I was hoping to have some answers coming to us directly from Regan, who is on the standards committee as well as the training committee of the CMMC AB. But we'll have a little bit of community discussion from those. I think for those of you that are on here, this is, you may have been to one of our previous events. This is the second in a series. We're doing town hall, sort of ask me anything sessions. The idea being to bring together organizations that are looking for certification under CMMC for some common areas of interest as we watch the CMMC initiative unfold and kind of work through, what the requirements are going to be and how we're going to prepare for that and be ready for that. A lot of what we've seen in the press so far has talked about some of the schedule and rollout of CMMC, but as we start preparing and start doing things, we're running into some interesting questions and issues as a community. And so these sessions, this town hall sessions, are designed to help bring government contractors together, members of the defense industrial base, bring them together to discuss these questions. Again, short of having our special guest here, I would like to open up to some questions from the audience. There's a Q&A panel on the Zoom webinar, which you're welcome to submit. And I will be answering the questions that I can answer on the call here today, and questions that we need to take back to Mr. Edens. If he's not able to join us as we proceed, then we'll get some of those questions back out to those who registered for the call today. So I want to first thank you for your time and attendance. Want to talk about a couple of areas that have been of great interest. The CMMC accreditation body, as you know, has been working diligently on a lot of areas. One is training, to get training out there for the assessor community, the folks who will come and do audits of those of us who are seeking certification, and a set of standards. We've been hearing from the accreditation body that the standards that are coming out is going to be an assessment guide, essentially what the assessors should look for, what the standards are. So for us, as we're preparing, that's going to give us quite a bit of advice on how to meet the standards, what's going to be acceptable, what's not. I think we've seen a lot of the focus so far being on the effort of getting, the focus so far has been on the effort of getting the assessors trained, right? So identifying some Pathfinder contracts where the CMMC requirements will be in there, and getting assessors trained to assess the contractors and subcontractors that are part of that. So for those that are involved in that, are watching that very closely. Some of the rest of us are a little bit on the sidelines, knowing that CMMC is something that's coming down the pike that we're going to have to be prepared for. The folks that we're talking with, us as service providers, I think you on the call today, are almost by definition the early adopters, the people who see CMMC as a competitive advantage, something that we think is going to put us ahead of the others in the business, recognizing those of us who have done a good job with cybersecurity and getting some advantage from that. So we can't get an assessment today. We can't even quite yet stand in line to get an assessment, but what are those things we can do for a head start? I'd be curious if you're in the audience, if you have questions or even answers, if you have suggestions of things that you're doing to be prepared, submit those in the Q&A. I'll talk about some of that. Some of the things that we've been hearing about as far as preparatory activities, again, a lot of the discussion with the CMMC authorities from the DoD and the accreditation body has been about their mechanics, the timing of the rollout. But a lot of the focus on the cyber side has been on taking care of what's happening with current DFARS requirements, NIST 800-171, making sure that those standards are in place. There's a direct overlap between 800-171 standards and CMMC level 3, meaning all those NIST standards are in CMMC level 3. with about 20 extra items added on. So, you know, very large focus is on making sure that all those things are taken care of from a technical perspective, and then backed up by the maturity to be able to take it through and look at it from an assessment perspective, right? Making sure that the information is there that's needed for an assessor to assess. Last week on this town hall, we spoke with board member Chris Golden from the CMMC accreditation body, and I asked him about the question of segmentation for companies that may have a need for varying levels of cybersecurity, where it may not be clear that they have one CMMC level that would cover their entire company and sort of one monolithic IT infrastructure, and how's that going to be addressed with CMMC. And Chris advised that CMMC will follow the data. So one of the things that we're hoping for is that the standards committee, of the accreditation body comes out with the assessment standard, that they provide us with some guidelines on how those complex scenarios should be addressed. Some of the scenarios that we've run across have been companies where there's a parent company that provides common IT support for subordinate companies. We've also run across scenarios where a company maybe has their DoD work in a small part of the business, where the majority of the business is doing non-DoD work, civil agencies, or even commercial work. So they want to limit the scope of their CMMC assessment. So while CMMC is given at the organizational level, as opposed to the system level with system accreditations we've seen in the past, there is still a desire for that to be, there is still a desire for that scope to be limited, to be able to, for the contractor to define what the scope of the assessment is. And again, in my conversation last week with Chris Golden, he made it very clear that where the data is will be the deciding factor. So if you can isolate data on a small number of systems, then perhaps just those systems need to go through the CMMC certification, and other systems that don't process federal contract information or not involved in DoD work, potentially outside and not something that needs to be assessed. We also talked about the concept that you may actually have different levels. You may have some systems that are processing sensitive data, controlled unclassified information, where CMMC level 3 requirements would apply, and other systems that only process federal contract information, only CMMC level 1 would apply. So the organization would still need to demonstrate the maturity and have the controls in place for CMMC level 3 to get that certification, but they wouldn't necessarily have to do that on all their information systems, just those that have the CUI. Other systems that have other kinds of data may have completely different cyber controls, and that's something that the assessor should be able to sort out if the company is diligent about isolating or creating boundaries between those systems. I do see a few questions coming in, so I'm going to try to get to a couple of those. Some of them are date related, about when the Pathfinder contracts are going to be announced, when we can expect to see the RFIs. There's been some dates published by CMMC on their website, on the CMMC AB website, and what we've been hearing from folks is that those dates are not changing due to coronavirus, other impacts. There's been some slippage in publication of some of the documents, but that the basic concept of having RFIs coming out this summer, RFPs coming out this fall and winter, still on schedule. It is going to be limited, we're hearing, to those Pathfinder contracts. So the actual identity of those contracts, I haven't seen, and again, without our guest here to ask, I don't know if we can understand when those might actually be released to us. Next question I'm seeing from the audience is, does CMMC apply to companies that manufacture COTS equipment? So the example in this question is test and measurement electronics. And the answer is no, it does not. There's been an exception published that talks about CMMC not applying to COTS items that are purchased without modification. So doesn't apply if you have and store and process sensitive data, controlled unclassified information, other things like that, as a company. But if you're a supplier of COTS product and you're just designing, building, and supplying those products, then CMMC is not going to be required. Next question I'm seeing here is, will there be a standard like ISO or AS9100 that is easier to work through than the current document? We've seen, so the current document that's out for CMMC, I will say, is quite a bit of an uptick for me as a practitioner and trying to read through it and understand the requirements. Excuse me. It's quite a bit of an uptick from what we saw with the NIST standard 800-171. It provides an explanation of what's intended. It provides some real world examples, but it seems like maybe still looking for a little bit more. What we can expect that's coming out additionally is an assessment standard that is intended as sort of an assessment workbook, a guide for assessors to give them the details of where they, what they will look for in terms of evidence, what kind of evidence is sufficient, what kind of evidence is not. That is intended, again, the audience intended there is for the assessors to set the standards for what they're allowed to accept, not accept, but it's also a very useful guide for us on the practitioner side to know what is sufficient, what is the right way to put things together, and what kind of evidence do we need to generate. So I guess the short answer to the question is yes, we are expecting a standard to come out that is more detailed than what we've seen so far. The other part of the question was, is it going to be easier to work through? I guess I can't say whether it's going to be easier. We'll see. I think generally that more explanation is better. So we'll go with that. Looking through a couple of the other questions. One question is, does certification for ISO 27001 cover us for CMMC? We have heard some discussion about reciprocity between those. I see that Regan Edens is joining us now, so we're going to bring him into the conversation here very shortly. But we have seen some discussion of reciprocity both between ISO 27000 as well as FedRAMP. But I think there's not been any published details yet of what that reciprocity will look like. But the idea is to give credit for the fact that ISO 27000 does represent a measurement of organizational maturity, very similar to the kind of maturity that we're looking for under CMMC. Hi, Regan, are you on? Can you hear us? I think you're on mute still.
Yep. Are you there?
I'm here.
So quite the adventure trying to get logged in. My apologies. It's probably user error, but these things happen. How's everyone doing? Good.
Good. Let me do Reagan. Let me do a quick introduction. First off, the audience today. This is a series, a town hall series, primarily members of the defense industrial base, organizations seeking certification primarily. So we have a pretty good number of people here participating today, sending some questions in, as well as we make this available for on-demand viewing as well. So my guest today, delayed somewhat, but thanks for being able to make it here. Regan Edens has a distinguished career as an Army officer, DoD civilian in the intelligence community, now very focused on transformation and innovation in the cybersecurity world. He's co-founder and chief of transformation, security, and compliance at DTC Global, and most notably for this conversation, a member of the board of directors of the CMMC accreditation body. So Regan chairs the standards committee and also is the co-chair of the training committee. So Regan, I'll just give you a couple minutes to kind of describe, overview what you're doing with the AB, and then maybe toss a few questions your way.
Sure, yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. So my job at the AB is, of course, it's a volunteer position, serve on the board on the Standards Management Committee. So the purpose of the Standards Management Committee is to really focus on bringing clarity, bringing consistency to the standards, and also bringing really consumability. So I'd heard while I was trying to get in, I actually dialed in and was listening, and someone mentioning the fact that they're having a very difficult time going through the current documents, source documents, and of course it is a significant challenge. And what we are working on right now is actually we're developing the the conformity assessments requirements document, and that will help. It's our effort and our intent to really bring together consistency and clarity and consumability really into a single document, so that they're the source documents. So you've seen 1.2 and so on and so forth for the model. That the source document for that contains the model. And so what we've done is we've extracted some data out of that and combined it with some of the appendices to really provide a single document for both the assessors, because that's the quick need, but also give the answers to the test for those folks out there in the defense industrial base who are really preparing for the test, right? And so that will, hopefully that document, it eventually will be 2 bookends. So you'll have the assessment criteria document that we have coming up shortly, and then eventually we will transition sort of the language of that to as a guide to help folks within the defense industrial base, if they're a compliance person, if they're maybe a quality manager, the IT guy or the IT gal, and those or maybe a COO just trying to get his arms around what the requirements are, or a small mid-sized business out there who really just needs to understand what they need to do.
Very good, very good. So Regan, a lot of the folks that we're talking to are the early adopters, right? It's the people who see CMMC as a competitive advantage, people who believe that they're doing a great job on cyber. They want to get credit for that. So we know we can't get an assessment today. We know we can't even really take our number at the deli counter quite yet, right? It's not yet a thing. What's your advice for those of us who want to get a head start in smart things to do today while we wait for the system to the program to kind of flesh itself out? Assessment, the documents you mentioned get published, assessors get trained, that sort of thing. What can we do to get rolling today?
Yeah. So the most important thing is this: is that those companies out there who have the DFARS requirement currently, right? So there's an expectation that within the DFARS requirement, there's an expectation that this is going to transition over to CMMC, which is likely. You really want to make sure that you've done your fundamentals, because success is always in the fundamentals. So you want to make sure that your risk and security assessment is up to speed, that your plan and action milestones, as you've worked those, are really focused on completing about the time that you'd really like to be ready for the CMMC certification. The other thing is on your system security plan. System security plan is sort of an ambiguous document right now. One of the things that we're working on in the conformity assessment requirements is to bring some structure to the system security plan, so that companies know exactly what information needs to be in that document, because that document really provides the pivot point for the assessor and the company to come together to talk about what's going to be in scope and what's going to be out of scope. So that the preparation of that system security plan is really, really important to the success of the company. The last piece on that, so we have the risk and security assessment, we have the plan of action milestones, which will not be accepted underneath CMMC. So it's very important that the timing considerations of, okay, well, we need to do this and this and this, and we're going to, there's always a budget. That's important, right? And there's always some integration and implementation period. And then, of course, you want to have all of those things in place, done, and sustained the day that the certifier shows up. So those fundamentals are absolutely critical to really getting prepared. As a competitive advantage, what I tell my clients and what I really tell anybody that I come in contact with is that that's absolutely the smartest thing to do, because I know firsthand, of course, from supporting my clients under DFARS, is that you need to be able to go back, implement best practices, go back, and then go back to your prime contractor and say, look, if you have someone to choose, we're doing best practices. We would absolutely love the opportunity to show you what we're doing as far as maintaining and sustaining those requirements. And if you have any uncertainty within the suppliers or subcontractors that you have to choose from, have confidence that you're willing to drive over to our place anytime and take a look, and we'll walk you through that program. Contracting officers are just the same, right? There's appropriately there's becoming more pressure for the on the contracting officers to ensure that self-attestation, that there's some confidence really beyond that. You know, NCIS and the Gertz memo and so on and so forth has been authorized to do the background investigation to ensure that those with criminal penalties that the self-attestation is really real. So so those sort of things I think will help your early adopters reconcile what they understand, continue the requirements underneath DFARS, and really look forward to and plan ahead for the requirements under CMMC. There are some Delta controls or Delta practices underneath CMMC, and there are significant differences in the way that maturity impacts the practices. So if you're looking at it from a DFARS perspective on 171, don't, because you need to take into consideration what does managed mean on a particular practice, and what is the importance of the policy and the procedures to that managed practice. Because while it's true that in some of the practices in CMMC they specify, you know, you'll have a policy or you'll have a procedure or it's very very clear. The reality is that the maturity level really impacts all of the practices. So it's very important that you take a look at, does a practice sustain, in order to be, for a practice to be sustained, what management pieces and what policy pieces are absolutely critical to that. So for me, you know, taking that consideration, maybe we can tease on that a little bit. For that, we can sort of tease that out and see what does that mean to the audience. But in reality, it's not just 171. In reality, it's 171 plus the policy for a level 3, plus the appropriate policies and procedures, and then of course plus the impact of managing that at the maturity level of CMMC level 3 maturity level, and then incorporating those adjacent those 20 adjacent practices.
Cool. Regan, we were scheduled to stop at the bottom of the hour, but since we got a late start, are you able to extend a few minutes, maybe
Sure.
10, 15 minutes?
Sure,
and for the audience members, if you're able to stick around and continue the discussion, please feel free. If not, again, we understand we scheduled it for a 30-minute block. So Regan, I like what you mentioned a second ago about you know the proactive people who are in the leader position being proactive and going to their primes and talking about where their security posture is.
Yep.
We've seen the primes, some large primes that we're working with are very, very involved in making sure there's no stragglers, right? They feel an obligation to mentor and guide their supplier base, companies, you know, smaller, less sophisticated than they are, and maybe help them out. So there's a lot of effort happening right now amongst the larger primes around, again, making sure there's no stragglers, no one falls behind. But the flip side of that is for those who are already leaders in position to do well, for them to, you know, share that information with their primes and make sure they're aware of that status. You know, very helpful, I think, right? I think, like I say, the primes sometimes have a very large number of suppliers, and they're very concerned about not having any gaps in their supply chain, right? They want to make sure that, since it's mandatory to have CMMC, that, you know, everybody that they need to be successful as a prime is along for the ride and doing a great job. So
yeah, I think it's really clear. You know, look, I run a company too, right? And so we're not doing compliance for compliance sake. So those companies out there that are interested in checking the block, I think are going to sort themselves out. But those early adopters who realize that that we are never turning back. You know, CMMC is never going away. You look at any compliance regime in the federal government, it never goes away. It only gets worse or better, depending upon you know, who's.
Let's say better.
Have, right?
Bar gets higher, right?
Right. It gets harder. And the reality is the whole the innovative aspect to the CMMC AB board, which I am deeply appreciative to be a part of, is the fact that we have the opportunity from an industry perspective, really, to manage the national security interest, to steward the model, right? So it is our job to protect and to strengthen and to steward the model. But we're going to do it in a way that's appropriate to industry, because at the end of the day, we're not doing compliance for compliance sake. The same, because love is, I often tell my girls, love is a two-way street, right? So the reality is that the defense companies out there who are early adopters need to just need to consider that fact and need to say, okay, look, since we got to do this and we want to really turn this, we want to make our money back. We want that return on investment. Now here's the opportunity to seize the initiative and to make our company stand above and beyond what our competitors out there, right? So if that's a contracting officer, if that's a relationship with a program manager, right? If that's a relationship as a 14-tier sub, right? At the end of the day, what we need recognition. So contracting officers need to recognize those companies who are early adopters, who say, you know what? I love the fact that Acme Manufacturing has really been aggressive, has really taken this by the horns. It's clear to me that this is not, they're not checking the block here. Everyone has self-attested by now. But really, when we start peeling that onion back, who is really compliant and who's not, right? So prime contractors out there recognizing those subs who have taken the bull by the horns and said, look, we're going to do best practices here. And then, of course, those subcontractors who have the responsibility, who are passing CU on, maybe a part manufacturer down to a CNC shop or that sort of thing. They need to recognize the fact that if I have two people to choose from, and even if the widget is $8 instead of $7, and the $8 widget I absolutely have confidence in is CMMC or DFARS compliant, then maybe I need to recognize and value that up and reward that company so that they can achieve that return on investment. However, though, right now we're in a state where a 14-tier sub is not going to be able to pass on that price because it's a highly competitive environment. We're having a tough time in the economy. I totally get that. However, what we can do is we can build relationships, and relationships are often more powerful than pricing, right? Because if my widget costs $7 and your widget costs $7, but I have a better relationship and my quality is spot on, then maybe there's an opportunity for me to surge ahead, because now the subcontractor, the prime contractor who I deal with every single day doesn't have to worry at all. Now there's peace of mind, because not only do I have great products, not only do I have a great relationship, but I've demonstrated to them the fact that I am compliant, and now they have confidence in, okay, we're building. It's a hard thing to do to manage the supply chain risk. So if companies are going to be proactive and engage me, I'm going to honor that, and I'm going to say, you know what? There are two columns here. There are columns that I'm confident in. There are columns that I'm not sure, and there are columns that are likely, not compliant. And I as a buyer for, or as an OEM, I really need to start thinking about picking winners and losers in my supply chain.
So Regan, I want to dive into a little bit of detail of CMMC mechanics, but before I do that, let me fly up for a second. You said something, not doing compliance for the sake of compliance. You talked about the fact that we're raising the bar and it's not going to go back down again. What specifically about CMMC, as you saw it emerging and coming out, spoke to you personally and said, I want to volunteer, I want to be part of that? What are the results you're expecting from CMMC that are personally compelling to you?
Well, so that's a really great question. For several years, I helped grow and run a export control consulting firm that had a great business model. And but the export control regime is very, very difficult. It's 28 years old, and they're very they're innovators there who are trying to iron out the wrinkles. But it is truly a broken regime. Everyone does their best in it, but it's complicated. It's hard to understand. The good folks at DVTC struggle to keep up with the volume of requirements, and then hardworking folks within the defense industrial base have a hard time meeting and sustaining those requirements. And so when I looked at DFARS and I see the opportunity, I've been in cyber for quite a while in different intelligence community projects, And I see, I've seen the legacy of our children, our grandchildren, really being stolen from us for at least the past decade. And so I think that there's an enormous opportunity, and that opportunity is to make CMMC something that no other compliance regime has ever been, and that is to build it on a relationship that's value added, actually. That over the long term, we protect the national security interest. Over the long term, we actually protect our IP, and over the long term, we actually protect that manufacturing base that many said would never come back. And so, yes, it's fragile, and yes, but it's worth protecting. So I think that the challenge here is that we make CMMC work in all of those interests. So we align our interests together, recognizing the fact that it is hard, for sure. Recognizing the fact that for many companies, it is sort of a compliance-driven digital transformation. But at the end of the day, we're never going back. The digital future is our future. CMMC is a part of that security-based ecosystem. And the reality is Industry 4.0 is on us. We have smart devices and we have dumb devices. So the challenge is how do we reconcile the security of that? Because we should not be giving away our future, our warfighting advantage, our competitive advantage, and really the legacy to our children or grandchildren to foreign adversaries. We just can't do that anymore. So for me, this is really a unique opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring the standard into an alignment with all of our interests. And so, to work with the PMO and to work with industry and really be a bridge to that gap. And then at the end of the day, make it consumable, consistent, and bring clarity to the standard so that, we were talking in the DoD industry working group, and I said, well, it's probably better for me to tell you things that you don't like than for you to live with ambiguity, right? So that's sort of the way that I see the standard, is that I would much rather have the standard clear and unambiguous, and even though we may not necessarily like everything that it says, then have it ambiguous and then have my contract at risk, or have my relationship with my prime contractor at risk, right? So no one wants that. So I think that that's how we move together in the future, and that really the struggles, legitimate struggles that companies are having out there, most cybersecurity, as we know, is it's a high demand, low density skill set. And so, and in order for this to be effective and to be sustainable, we have to really bring not a CMMC to dummies. We have to bring CMMC to everyone. And there are significant challenges to do that, because most companies, hardworking companies out there, they do not have a PhD in cybersecurity supporting them, right? They don't know anybody who has a PhD in cybersecurity. So that it's not really going to help to maintain the same sort of complex jargon that exists in the current standards, because they're written because it's really hard to do. NIST has done a wonderful job in making a very, very difficult thing, to bring those controls and practices to bear. But what we have to do is we have to really engage that and say, how can we make this better? And so everyone serves a portion of that responsibility. And I think that that's the portion of responsibility that standards management has for the defense industrial base.
Regan, that's a really good point. And we had a session like this a few weeks ago with Mark Montgomery, who's the executive director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, talked about the Solarium report that came out in March, talks about how much our adversaries have been winning and what we need to do as a nation to stop that. And one of his comments was, all of America needs to be part of the solution. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but basically everyone, right? Even those who are not cyber experts and don't have the PhD, and maybe don't even have a PhD advisor at their disposal. So I think we see CMMC as really enabling, empowering a lot of small businesses in particular that don't have dedicated staffs to think differently about cybersecurity. And it's a good thing, right? These are companies who view it as not part of their core competency. It isn't part of their core competency, but they don't want to be victims. They don't want to have their valuable intellectual property, their innovative contributions taken by these foreign adversaries. So yes, if it can achieve that goal, that's a lofty goal, and I hope it does. I agree with your thinking. And one of the reasons why we're doing a lot of these sessions is to kind of spread that thinking, right? That CMMC is not just another bureaucratic imposition, pain in the neck thing that we have to deal with, but is truly valuable in making our country stronger and having economic benefits to us, right? The money we spend on CMMC and building security to comply with CMMC is hopefully a very much smaller number than what we've been losing to our foreign adversaries through intellectual property theft.
Yeah, let me give
well
you
documented.
a really, apology, Ed. Let me just give you a very quick difference that I'm taking. So, some folks will see on LinkedIn, CMMC conversations, right? So that's an opportunity. Businesses that have been proactive to reach out to me and say, "Hey, Regan, I'm not sure, how's this going to affect us or how that's going to affect us," and I don't always have the answer because we're literally building that rocket ship in flight, right? But the value though is that I see CMMC as an ecosystem, and that ecosystem consists not in the relationship between the government as the enforcer and the business as the victim, if you will, of the enforcement, right? The relationship is part of the CMMC professionals, the practitioners like you and I, the vendors, right? Who are looking for innovative ways to make it easier for companies to do all of the things that you mentioned, Ed, but at the end of the day, make it easier for them to meet those requirements and for them to have confidence that, okay, if I buy A plus B plus C, now I've met the requirements, I'm scalable for my company, and I've been able to support, what my business interests are. And quite often when I help my clients, we actually make the company better because we don't have this onerous layer of compliance. We actually align compliance for CMMC and for DFARS, DFARS, but and future CMMC. We align that compliance with their operations, with their policies, with their procedures. So it's not just this set of handcuffs that has sort of been the, compliance has been the office of no, right? That's absolutely going to break things. What we need compliance to be the office of yes for CMMC, which is we have to be compliant, yes. So what do we need to do to be compliant? Well, we need to do these things, and then we're going to align these things with your operations, with your marketing, with your business development guys, with your relationship and shipping and non-destructive testing and archiving and all of the requirements for managing information. We're going to align these efforts so that we make things actually better. We just don't handcuff people because now we have a new rule, right? We rethink the rule, and that's one of the reasons why I love Six Sigma so much, is because we're really rethinking how we do business in a way that yes, of course, we meet the requirements, but the outcome is actually better.
Very good. Just have time for a couple of audience questions. There's a lot that have come in. I see that about 95% of the audience is able to stay on a little bit longer than we had scheduled. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. A couple of questions that seem to be floating to the top. One is the Pathfinder contracts, the idea of these first contracts that are going to have CMMC as a requirement and all the people in the supply chain supporting those contracts. Do we know when those are going to be announced as far as which contracts it's going to be? Has that come out? Has it been discussed? What's your insight on that?
So it hasn't come out. It has. Well, of course, it's we're discussing. We're literally. It's not an airplane anymore. This is a rocket ship. This is actually a rocket ship that's building rocket ships in flight. Right. I mean, this is our program. So the challenge here is that for the Pathfinders, it has not been identified. I think that there are a lot of the services, military services out there that are raring to go. So once the rulemaking process is complete, my expectation is that that we will do the PMO will do their very best to manage sort of the incremental flow of contracts. However, there are challenges there, and the challenges are that the services are raring to go. They want these requirements in place in order to obviously protect the national security interest. And so, that there's going to be a wrangling of cats, so to speak, that's not my purview, except for the fact that my job is to do my best, and our best, really, it's a team effort, to really get the DIB compliant with DFARS first. Okay, don't think about CMMC unless you are compliant with the requirements under DFARS 7012, and unless you're well on your way to getting your POAM complete. You know, it's good to sort of think about it in sort of in the future sense, but you need to re-energize and refocus your organization to meet those requirements. That's absolutely critical. And the Delta practices, those additional 20 practices, and the things about CMMC maturity and so on and so forth that I spoke to earlier, those are important. Of course they are. However, energizing the organization or re-energizing the organization, because it may have been a year or 2 years, making sure that RSA is done and up to date. It's an annual requirement, right? And those things are really, really, really purposeful, and they will be purposeful to preparing your organization to be ready for CMMC. So, you know, exactly, I don't know about the Pathfinder contracts, but really the focus here is to be able to truly focus on what are your responsibilities now.
So you made reference to the DFARS, the 20 Delta. So that sort of implies CMMC level 3, which although not the majority of the DIB, because I think a majority of the DIB maybe doesn't have any CUI, right? But it's kind of the sweet spot, if you will. So when we look at CMMC 5 levels, you know, level 1, we know what that means. It's people who have FCI and nothing else, right? Or maybe no sensitive data whatsoever. Level 3 is about storing and processing CUI. What is the sort of the clear criteria for levels 2, 4, 5, right? We've heard that level 2 is maybe a bridge level, maybe not any contracts coming out that actually require level 2 as their target level. Has it been defined? What are the criteria for level 4 and 5? Is it defined data types? Is it some other factors? What can we expect there as far as when will those levels be required?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. That 4 and 5, I think it's going to be less than 1 to 5% of the DIB. So I think that the organizations that are going to be required underneath 4 and 5 are probably going to be very keenly aware that they need to enhance their security requirements associated with the unique nature of their contracts. So I don't think anyone at 4 and 5 are going to be surprised. Okay. Now, levels 1 and 2, you're spot on. So levels 1 and 2 covers FCI. Now, there's an important point to FCI that very few people may really understand. FCI covers, the definition of FCI covers any information that is non-public between the organization and the government, okay, associated with a contract. But it's not necessarily, you know, just the contract details or, you know, diagrams associated with the contract or those things not associated with the payment, because that's clearly understood within the definition of FCI. But it can be any information that's associated with the contract between the federal government that is non-public. So clarifying information on that. On level 2 is also has some unique challenges, and you know what you're hearing is Regan's opinion, right? And my opinion is that it will be interesting that once contracting officers really get a sense of understanding of the differences between level 1 and level 2, I think actually more contracts in the future will migrate to level 2 than level 1. And the reason for that is because there are very basic and very basic requirements for a level 1 contract. But really the intent of level 2 in our application of FCI in the conformity assessment requirements document that we're building now, and we're working out details. So again, I apologize that I wish I could tell you everything was definitive. It's not. But it's the application of FCI, and it's to FCI, the CUI fundamentals. And the reason for that is because what we want to do is we want to lower the overall risk of the organization for them to be able to maintain the confidentiality of FCI. So you can't, the federal law is very clear that you can't apply CUI standards to FCI, but what you can do is you can apply principles in the effort and to increase the maturity of the organization to lower the risk to confidentiality of the SCI information. So we're working on it right now, and it will be interesting to see how this sort of plays itself out. But I think level 2 may end up being actually more valuable to the government's interest over the long period because of the fact that you have this increased level of maturity. And if I'm a contracting officer and there's FCI, it's not quite CUI, but it's FCI that I don't want to get, I want to maintain that level of confidentiality, then which protects that national security interest or the interest of the federal government's interest? Is it level 1 or level 2? And the answer may sometime in the future be that it's actually level 2.
There's a very big difference in the height of the bar between level 1 and level 2. I mean, it's probably the biggest delta between any of the levels, I think.
Yeah.
So one last question to kind of wrap things up. Question was the guide that you spoke about earlier, the assessment guide that the standards committee is working on. The question was, where can we find that? So maybe just indicate, I know it's not published yet, but can you give a little indication of what's out there now on your website and what we can expect to see coming out in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I've listed it on the dark web for about $10,000 a copy.
Nice.
So, the reality is that it's unfortunately it's not a public document right now. There's for good reason, because right now we are working through. The devil's always in the details with this, right? And so. The model does not include, this is sort of a trick question that I use, is, does the model include any standards? And the answer is no, it does not. It only includes practices. It references the standards. So the application of the standard to the practice takes some time to really think about how do we want to define the criteria that really makes it very clear what's a go and what's a no-go, what's conformity and what's non-conformity. So although it's a very aggressive timeline, we've been working through, my industry working group is absolutely amazing. And it's filled with Jedi Knights, and we spend hours, literally, arguing and debating the details of every single word that's associated with the practice and associated with the standard. So I think it's going to be worth the wait. We can sort of hurry up to fail and sort of publish a not very well improved version of 171 alpha that I don't think would be as valuable, because if 171 alpha was valuable, we have a much higher compliance rate with DFARS than we do. So I think that the value is taking the extra time to sort of polish and sharpen the sword within the document, so we have clarifying language, and it's easier for companies to read it, or for an assessor to read it and apply the standard consistently. Whether I'm wanting the answers to the test as a company, or whether I'm an assessor, and it's absolutely my responsibility to ensure that I apply consistency to the application of the standard across companies, right? Because we don't want a high degree of variability. So it's not available yet. We are working on with the provisional assessors that we're going to certify here shortly, and the provisional C3POs that we're working with to help refine continuous improvement on our internal document until it's ready for release. So just be patient. I promise you it will be worth it, because at the end of the day, you can't, once the genie's out, you can't get back, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So and it's very hard it's going to be very difficult to navigate the changes to the standard, because the ship is so big, and we want to make sure that we just don't, by changing words, all of a sudden, that's a huge impact, because companies really can't absorb those large impacts very quickly. So we want to be deliberate. It is an aggressive timeline, and we're doing our absolute best. And I promise you that I was up for the last 44 hours, the day before yesterday, trying to meet an internal deadline to get this done. So, and I'm a volunteer, and I've got a company to run, right? So we take these responsibilities very seriously, and I promise you, we are giving 110%, and absolutely no less.
Well, Regan, thank you very much. I have 1,000 questions from the audience, as well as a few of my own questions I didn't get to ask today, even though we spent longer than our scheduled time, even with the delay. So perhaps we could schedule a follow-on session as things progress and get fleshed out a little bit more. Might be interesting to have more of a deep dive.
I'm here for you. If you'd like to do this very regularly, I'm absolutely open to that. At the end of the day, building a relationship of trust between the CMMC AB and the DIB is imperative. And it's unfortunate that we have such a compact timeline and so many requirements that we really can't issue things out as we would normally do over the course of 3 or 4 months and that sort of thing. So if being able to engage your audience and members of the DIB in a format like this brings value, so that at each point clarity is gained as we work through this, I love to do it, and am very humbled to be able to contribute to their success, and willing to do that whatever it takes.
Very good. I appreciate it very much. Appreciate your time and all the good information you put out for us today. As I mentioned, we're all in the watch, align, make sure we're doing the right things, make sure we're staying ahead of the curve. This is the early adopter crowd that you're talking to here on this this forum. So
I love you guys. And ladies,
we are the champions, right? We're
yep.
take it forward.
Keep crushing it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. And for those in the audience, thanks for staying a little bit over time. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. And we'll be doing this this town hall on a weekly basis. So look forward to some additional invitations coming out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.